Hello everyone. Here comes the section in which I do a cognitive functional analysis of some key moments where I interview participants INTJ Sallie and INFP CJ, where I think it's the case that some things they were saying kind of exemplified expression of their respective cognitive functions. And what makes this a kind of interesting case study, I think, is that these two were pretty Jungian typology and Myers-Briggs temperament indicator naive. Sallie was the only one who really knew anything about it. As CJ said, the only thing she knew coming into it was that she would identify as an introvert. And Sallie had only done, as you know, most people only do, since it can be quite expensive to get the official MBTI assessment administered by a certified practitioner. Just happened upon some kind of questionnaire online, happened to go and look at a profile, an unofficial profile, I imagine, and identified with it. But that was it. Neither of them knew anything about the cognitive functions. So I think that gives us a special kind of value in a way, because if the fact that they didn't know anything about them, but they were doing and saying, particularly Sallie, I think, were completely naturally exemplifying some type temperamental characteristics in what they were saying, I think is really cool. So I love this part. So for example, a textbook thing that happened, this is something that didn't happen in the interview, but that had happened during their visit, and it was a moment where inside myself I was like, whoa, I was getting all excited. I get a little tingle when that happens, which it does quite often when I'm talking to people about their temperamental preferences. But often not even. This particular example I'm going to give right now this happened just completely unprompted. I don't even know if I had yet shared with Sallie that I was a big old nerd in this area, I don't even know if it had come up as a subject. I was just observing, and she said, she said in respect to, she'd been talking about parenting, and she said something like, I want to be able to, give my kids what I can. I think she meant by way of, if I remember correctly, by way of guidance and parenting, informing them, preparing them. But she said, if I don't know something, then I'll try and help them find the information they need from another source. And I just thought that was just like, woo, because that is a hallmark characteristic of INTJs, is that sometimes what causes them to come off, to be interpreted as arrogant by others, is because they are arrogant. No, yeah, sometimes they are, but but actually I know that it's much more often the case that people will mistakenly assume that they're being arrogant, because they, when really what it is, much more accurately and precisely, is that they have put an enormous amount of effort into mastering certain competencies, and they research a lot usually about things that interest them and that are necessary to making their plans for the goals they want to achieve. And they know very well what it is they know, and when they know quite often they have these areas of expertise where they've really done a lot of research and a lot of thinking about the subject. So they know what they know, and they're confident in that. And they're also very averse to pussyfooting around, or they're not naturally, they have to sort of think about that. It doesn't come naturally to them necessarily to couch things in really diplomatic terms. That's something that they might learn later as they mature. They might find that that's a useful thing for them to, skills for them to sort of extra social skill sophistication that they find worth it to learn and practice, or maybe it's trained into them as children. But naturally they're pretty if just left totally to their own devices and inclinations, they're quite blunt. And they may be, especially when young, they may be a bit surprised by the reactions, this very direct straightforwardness, no polish on it, kind of way of presenting their assertions. How sometimes people get offended. It's quite often that it will puzzle them until they get more life experience. So anyhow, so when she just completely out of the blue said something like that, which I thought was very characteristic, and I've certainly, all the INTJs that I've known have demonstrated that at some point or another very naturally, that where, again, if you want their help in solving some sort of a problem, and they like you at all, or they're interested in the problem at all, then they will try and assist you. And when it comes time, when you come across something as in part of the problem solving process that is beyond their competence, beyond their knowledge, they will very freely say so. They're not going to bullshit you and pretend they know things they don't, and they just really are not apt to do that, usually. So there. Now, here's my usual disclaimer. I am just a regular schmo who's uncommonly informed, who's an autodidact about the Myers-Briggs temperament indicator, and more recently learning about the Jungian cognitive functions upon which that instrument is based, from which it is derived. And so what I'm doing here is in my interpretation and analysis, and it's purely speculative, and it's just my opinion. And what I'm doing, this interpretation that I'm doing, it's very much, I need to acknowledge, it's very much an art, so it's not a science, what I'm doing. And so people might really disagree with it or whatever. I love it when people get into discussion in the comments. And I have invited Sallie and CJ themselves I let them know that I posted the series, and I have invited them to weigh in if they have anything to say about what I've said or anything else, to join in on the thing. So last thing I'll say for this little opener section, for the analysis section, is that I think it's pretty neat too that we have here as an example an INTJ who is working in a very people-to-people, very interpersonal heavy line of work, like being a psychotherapist, being in one of the helping professions. And, it's a minor point, but it does just go to show you, breaks the stereotypes, that all the NTs are working in high tech and all the NFs are working in the helping fields. That's not, certainly not true. There are all kinds of people of all the different types in every part of society and in every occupation and in every domain. So there you go. But it is kind of neat to see, an INTJ's approach to helping people psychologically. It's pretty cool. So more about that in the following videos. Thanks for joining me again.